Lots to talk about this morning. Boris Johnson's statement just a few moments ago outside Number 10. Well, joining me this morning to talk about other issues, but I'm sure, no doubt, he would want to talk about what Boris Johnson had to say as well, is the editor of Spiked Online, Brendan ONeill. Good morning to you, Brendan.
Hi, Julia.
Hello, lovely to speak to you. Obviously, it's really good, I think, for anyone worried about the Prime Minister over recent weeks to see the Prime Minister standing there outside Number 10. It's more than 3 weeks since we saw him clapping for carers the Thursday before he went into hospital. Other than that video we saw when he just came out of ICU, when he was sitting down, we hadn't seen him out and about. Big relief. He likened, interestingly, the virus to a mugger. And so this is the point at which we're wrestling the mugger to the floor. I mean, it's very typical sort of flowery language we'd expect from him. But again, I think that's how a lot of people say who've had been victim to this virus would say they'd feel. But he made it really clear, didn't he? Look, he absolutely gets the urge to get back to work and end the lockdown and start the exit strategy. But he made it very clear that although there'll be more information in the days to come, we are not going to see that lockdown being lifted anytime soon.
Yeah, I thought it was actually a really well-crafted message because, well, firstly, he looked and sounded well, and he was being very visible. He was basically saying, I'm back in charge of the country. And I do think people were saying, look, who's in charge of the country? What's going on? Where is the leadership? So I think that will actually make people feel a bit more relaxed. And he made it clear that he shares concerns about the economic impact of the lockdown, while also saying that we can't say just yet when it will be eased. So he was kind of playing both sides, which I think was probably the right approach for him to take on his first statement back in Downing Street.
Well, there's been a lot of talk there about hawks and doves in Downing Street and who wants to lift the economy first. Who wants? Look, everyone's sane is on the same page. We want to ease the lockdown at the maximum point to where we can save the most lives, but also get the economy back acting as soon as possible. But there are going to be, even when you say let's look at the science, there are going to be different views on your relative balance you put towards deaths that may happen in the future as a result of us having an economic decline for longer, and deaths that are happening right now, and that is a fine line to walk. Now, when the government says, "Look, we're following the science," and he talked about the maximum possible transparency is going to be given about the decision-making process and building a consensus, it may well be that actually you can't build a full consensus. People are going to differ on this, and that's legitimate in a modern democracy. We don't have a Chinese-style sort of Politburo, do we?
That's absolutely right. And there will be conflict and tension and debate, and a consensus is very difficult. And also, I think what we're realizing now over the past couple of weeks is that the idea of scientific consensus is also a bit of a nonsense. You know, for so long we've been told we have to obey the science on climate change, we have to listen to the experts on every single issue like no deal Brexit and so on. But what we've discovered recently is that scientists disagree as well. There are huge disagreements between epidemiologists about the best approach to this disease, whether a lockdown is a good idea. Some scientists think it is, some say it isn't. There was an interesting quote in The Spectator from a member of the cabinet who said he can't believe how much infighting and disagreement there is among scientists. So that's a really good thing for us to realise, that the idea of a solid consensus we must all bow down to is always a bit of a myth. There will always be debate.
Well, I mean, we had that during Brexit. Like, I remember your question time audiences again and again saying, why can't we compromise? No, compromise and consensus are not always possible and again, not always desirable. And there has been a feeling, hasn't there, that while we've been waiting for Boris Johnson to get well, thankfully he is obviously back well, and obviously not bothered about the lack of hairdressers, as a lot of people are, as he never would be. Just lovely to see that mop of hair, I think, for a lot of us. But I think that this idea that actually, a lot of people are thinking, well, the government doesn't have a leader. We don't have the formal process like the Americans do. Okay, the vice president steps in, and so there's the sort of the idea that decisions weren't being made, and as soon as the prime minister came back, then decisions would be made. But it's quite clear he has been on top of his brief while he's been away. Certainly in the last week, he's been keeping on top of it, and that nothing has changed. And it hasn't just been people, treading water. This is government policy. We are not ready yet. We've got our this rate of transmission. We've got it below 1, but it may be somewhere between 0.5 and 1. If it's closer to 1, that means that one wrong step and we could see a massive big second spike. So it is vital that we wait for the crucial moment. Just as we wait for the crucial moment to start a lockdown, you wait for the crucial moment to end the lockdown too.
Yeah, and I think one of the, I'm sceptical of the lockdown, especially if it goes on much longer, because I am one of those people like Boris and like millions of others who are concerned both about this terrible virus and about the economic consequences. But I think the thing that really strikes me about Boris at the moment, I think the attacks on Boris coming from some sections of the media who almost want to hold him culpable for the virus itself, which is a bizarre, almost medieval idea that he would bear responsibility for a virus that came out of nowhere, or rather came out of China. The attacks on Boris, Boris the Butcher, and all this awful, awful stuff that's been said amongst the Twitterati and the left sections of the media is so completely out of order. It's so clear to most normal, rational people that he and his government are working incredibly hard to flatten the curve, as they say, and to ensure that the virus doesn't impact too badly on this country. They're working their socks off behind the scenes, and I think that kind of attempt to establish political culpability for every COVID death and for every COVID impact is really awful, and that's what's making a lot of people turn off from the media and get behind Boris.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I was watching Have I Got for my sins, watching Have I Got News for You briefly on Friday night, just to sort of see just how bad it could be. And again, the usual, every single week, 5 people who are, all very similar political viewpoints, and I can guess all of them, basically saying, well, this is why the government, the government's completely failing on the tackling the pandemic, and absolutely failures why no one supports the government. You just think, have you not seen any polling here? Yes, people are growing tired and weary of the lockdown, but there's no evidence that actually people are willing to flout it and think it's not the right decision. Let me also ask you, before we let you go, just before we get to the news, running a little bit late, but about a subject I did want to speak to you about before we knew the Prime Minister was making a statement, and that is the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey, and a number of other Liberal Democrats deciding to tweet out about how they've been fasting as a show of solidarity with Muslims who began Ramadan and the month of fasting at the end of last week. Although one Liberal Democrat councillor decided to show a picture of eggs and bacon, of all things, which he was eating before he began his fast. I can't tell now whether some of these social media postings are actually are legitimate or are spoofs anymore. But what did you make of Ed Davey? And we did obviously ask him to come on the show, basically fasting for Ramadan to show solidarity with Muslims.
I thought it was really creepy. They're having the Lib Dem Iftar, where they are basically, lots of Lib Dems are basically just skipping a meal, and they're saying that they're doing it in solidarity with Muslims at Ramadan. I thought it was just such an awful example of virtue signalling, and the fact that a Lib Dem councillor tweeted a picture of bacon was just summed it up, the complete idiocy of it. And I think, it's absolutely fantastic that we live in a country that has religious freedom and that Muslims and Christians and Sikhs and Jews can celebrate all their festivals. That's essential. But this attempt to cozy up in this rather creepy way and say, I'm a good person because I like Muslims, I just think it's deeply patronizing. Of course, the flip side is that you're allowed to pour your love out for Islam online, but anyone who criticizes Islam gets into a lot of trouble. We saw that with Jeff Goldblum the other day when he was on RuPaul's Drag Race, and there was a drag queen who was dressed as a Muslim woman, and he said, isn't this ironic, because Islam has a bit of a problem with homosexuality and a bit of a problem with women's freedom. And now, of course, there are efforts to cancel Jeff Goldblum because he dared to raise a criticism of Islam. So you do wonder, what position does Islam hold in our society at the moment? Do we all have to bow down to it? Are we allowed to criticize it? I think religious freedom is great, but criticism of religion is essential too.
Well, it is what we do, and I'm like, my listeners will know, I am an atheist. I don't hold a candle for any religion, but I'm absolutely respectful of everyone else's views, and would march in the streets, people's right to worship as they wish, and these are absolutely crucial rights. But again, I did find it the sort of most patronising kind of virtue signalling to sort of say in some way, do you show solidarity with people by taking on their own religious festivals? I just don't understand why anybody, actually, I think our very large British Muslim population would want that or need that.